of Africa, her rich traditions in music and dance started facing threats of extinction. The greed and unscrupulous imperialist design of the Arabs and the West had been pushing the natives almost to the point of annihilation. But imperialism, in spite of its many evils, was instrumental in introducing literacy among the African people, though the imperial powers introduced it merely for their own purpose of getting a steady supply of clerks, soldiers, and policemen from among the natives. But the natives of Africa learned one or more European languages. Empowered by the colonizers' language, they could prove that the European notion that Africa was a land of Calibans was a big mistake. They could prove themselves through the formidable body of African literatures in English. The African literature, with its distinct difference from European or American literature, has a completely different meaning and significance. In 1978 came Said's seminal work, Orientalism, where Edward Said shows how the West constructed the Orient as grossly inferior to the West in every aspect. And this fabricated representation of the East was built out of the Occident's derogatory attitude towards Middle Eastern, Asian, and African societies. The study of African literature in India has perhaps a more significant importance. But what are the ways of exploring and understanding African literature in India? Should we read African literature from a historical angle? Or should we read it simply as a story of another civilization? Or should we take a purely literary and aesthetic angle? African countries and India have a strong point of similarity, as both India and Africa passed through a traumatic colonial period and a crisis-ridden post-colonial period. And the colonial hangover is still not completely over. Perhaps India, with a cultural history and written literature of around 5,000 years, could more effectively resist the Western onslaught to break down the cultural fabric of this subcontinent. But both Africa and India are labeled by the West as the other, and both fought back with the same weapon, the weapon of English language, to forge an identity in the map of global literature and politics. Literatures by Asian, African, and non-English speaking authors have finally found a compulsive place in the map of global literatures. And Amitav Ghosh says, it is no longer possible for critics to dismiss the third world literature in English. Writers of the West have been forming distorted and imaginary images of Africa and India even centuries before Said had pointed it out in his book. The Prince of Morocco in Merchant of Venice and Othello in Shakespeare's Othello apparently suffered from a psychological complex for their black skin. Andrew Marvell speaks of a fantastic India where rubies are scattered on the bank of the river Ganges. And for P.B. Shelley, India meant champak odors. Attempts to represent the African world and the colonial intrusion and oppression in Africa in fictions and non-fictional works in English language in the late 19th and early 20th century failed to give an authentic picture of the land and the people. It is rather interesting that in 1927, a Bengali author chose Africa as the major setting of his fictional work. Mountain in the Moon or Chander Pahar gives the people of this part of India a unique African exposure. But Vibhuti Bhushan's version of Africa is the version of a poet who, with information from books alone, could create his own Africa without ever moving away from India. Conrad's Heart of Darkness, 1899, a novel based on Conrad's voyage along the river Congo, and Graham Greene's travel book Journey Without Maps, 1936, based on Greene's 4-week walk through the interior of Liberia, are definitely important works. But Conrad's novel is virtually rejected by both Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Chinua Achebe. Achebe notes, Conrad was a seductive writer. He could pull the readers into the fray, and if it were not for what he had said about me and my people, I would probably be thinking only of that seduction. Achebe also said that Conrad's language and attitude were terribly wrong in portraying the Africans. The works of Conrad and Greene no doubt took up Africa as their subject, but they cannot claim the status of African literature. Abdul Jan Muhammad points out two phases of African literature: the phase of colonial domination and hegemonic colonization. But it is difficult to find a common theory to bring Kenyan literature, Nigerian literature, South African literature, West African literature, and so on under a single umbrella. Janos Reyes has suggested 5 thrust areas of the Third World literature, and of them, 3 are most important. They are political and economic present, colonial past, and response to Western civilization. For the study of African literature in India, the study of African literature in India has 2 categories: African literature in the academic syllabus of Indian universities, and African literature for the common non-academic reader. When we read a poem by an African poet, as non-initiated readers, we involuntarily try to relate our Indian experience with the African text. Even when we try to explore African literature as academic pursuits, several things work together in our mind, including our knowledge and alertness of global politics, economy, and the social, cultural, historical, ethnic, and topographical position of Africa. What happens when Indians in Indian contexts and with Indian consciousness study a text or watch a film produced in another cultural background? Willingly or unwillingly, the lens of Indian consciousness works. And perhaps similar things happen when an African reader reads an Indian text. She or he also thinks in a similar way. Language is a hugely important aspect of a culture, because language does not simply mean the signifier and the signified. Language means the sound, sentiment, and the very pulse of the land. The post-colonial realization of the deep-rooted effects of the inheritances from the imperial power, even after decolonization, is that the decolonized people often remain still dependent on their erstwhile masters. And this is a psychological dependence. Cultural colonization has a deeper effect than political colonization. The language itself is a mask. So a Negro or an African using a white man's language must be suffering from a sense of guilt that she or he is neglecting the Negro identity. The negritude movement started in the early 20th century, and black men tried to convince themselves that emotion is Negro and reason is Greek. One of the earliest poets who preached negritude through poetry is Leopold Sédar Senghor. To him, beauty is black, black Africa. He voiced African attitude towards beauty and death and negated the Western concept that beauty is white and that death suggests finality. In African concept, death is a bridge between the living and the dead. Now let us quote from Senghor's Black Woman. Naked woman, black woman, clothed with her color, which is life, with her form, which is beauty. When in India we read these lines, we find in the African poet's eulogy of black beauty something similar in the eulogy of his wife by the vanished Yaksha in Kalidas's Meghaduta, where the Yaksha describes his wife as Tanni Shama. Shama means dark. In another poem of Senghor, I pronounce your name, we may find something more interesting. And I quote two lines from that poem. Nayat, your name is mild like cinnamon. It is a fragrance in which lemon grove sleeps. A reader from the cultural background of Bengal may remember Jibanananda Das, সবুজ ঘাসের দেশ যখন সে দেখে দারুচিনি দ্বীপের ভিতর, when he sees the green meadows in the cinnamon island. Perhaps in both the poets, cinnamon comes in an association of nature, love, and beauty. Senghor, sitting in France, remembers Africa with nostalgia and love, while Hughes in America speaks of America in the voice of an Afro-American. I too sing America, I am the darker brother. Swenka, in many poems, takes up the post-colonial problem, while Imamu Amiri Baraka's poems revealed a disillusionment with white culture. Mabel Sagoon is a pioneer gender poet of Africa, and other great poets of this genre are Christopher Okigbo, Ifeanyiwa Lekwa, and Catherine Obianuju, etc. Poetry is a genre which always transcends the barriers of border. So whether we read Senghor or Swenka or Obianuju, in spite of the authentic smell of the African soil, we discern in them the essential fragrance of man in every condition. Perhaps Indians can more easily relate themselves with African novelists. Some of the great names are Chinua Achebe, Chinamande Ngozi Adichie, Ben Okri Ngugiwa Thiong'o, Buchi Emecheta. Just a few words about Buchi Emecheta. Buchi is a feminist writer, and she declares that she writes from a feminist point of view. Her novel, The Bride Price, is a novel about bride wealth and polygamy. And she shows how girls are treated as commodities. In another novel, Joys of Motherhood, the deplorable predicament of women is highlighted. In The Second Class Citizen, Bucci presents the life of a black girl who had a dream to go to the United Kingdom and receive education there. But when she goes there with Francis Obi, she faces gender discrimination and social discrimination from Francis and from the society. Meja Mayunji's novels portray a socialist realism, as you see the novels like Kill Me Quick or Going Down River Road and The Cockroach Dance, etc. The problem of unemployment, the predicament of construction workers, and the life of a meter reader are the subjects of these three novels. Chinua Achebe is one of the most well-known and well-received novelists in India and to the Indian people. The Indian people can easily relate themselves with his two seminal works, Things Fall Apart and No Longer at Ease. Things Fall Apart is a record of a time when the Nigerian civilization was shifting from the pre-colonial dependence, from the pre-colonial independence to colonial domination of the white race. The novel shows how the Igbo society fell apart as the colonial masters intruded in the territory of Nigeria. The novel is about European imperialism and the disintegration of Umofia. Achebe leaves in the novel a note of inevitability, as if such a thing was destined to happen. Things Fall Apart basically presents the angst of the Nigerian people. But the novel is much more than that. The title of the novel is taken from The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. And the poem articulates a belief that in spite of the evil forces, the continuance of the human race is guaranteed. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. Every change in humankind comes through a prolonged and intense trauma. The physical and the psychological agony of the Indian subcontinent during the time of political independence and also during the time of emancipation is not merely a part of history, but it is a living presence. And thereby, you can say that the experience of India and the experience of Nigeria are somewhat the same, because the people of both the countries suffered perhaps the same agony, the agony of colonization and post-colonial crisis. The reference to the poem by Yeats is, in essence, a negation of the rigid Europe-Africa divide. In Achebe's novel, the episode of the killing of Ikanafuma seems to be a reversal of the theme of patricide in Oedipus the King. And it is at the same time almost a replication of the theme of unexpected violence from a loved one, as we see in Julius Caesar. Thus, in an African narrative, we discern the ghost of Sophocles and Shakespeare. Beyond the theme of imperialism and colonial politics in the African world, and beyond the theme of guilt and punishment, there are fairly visible glimpses of a wider world of the community of man. And that is the hallmark of any great art. The sufferings of the African communities symbolically become the sufferings of the neglected, deprived, and exploited people in any part of the world. The title of No Longer at Ease reminds a reader of T.S. Eliot, and the narrative shows the predicament of confusion of Obi in post-colonial Nigeria. Obi finds himself psychologically exhausted in a country that he cannot love in the same way as his father and grandfather did. And in spite of the Western education, he is not at all at ease with Western values and standards. He has to cope with these values and standards. The fall of Obi indicates the tragedy of post-colonial Nigeria. And such a situation is not unknown to the people of India. The origin of African drama is not different from the origin of European drama and Indian drama. Greek drama originated from the rituals during the festival of Dionysus. And in India, there was a close connection between Nritya dance and Natta drama. African drama developed from festival drama and ritual theatre. In the plays of Harbat Ogunde, we find an amalgamation of different musical traditions of the various kingdoms of the Oruba land. Ogunde would weave different contemporary political issues into Uruba stories. And the two more well-known plays of Ugande are Strike and Hunger and Tiger's Empire. They were basically protests against colonial politics and exploitation. The name of Jip Clark certainly merits to feature in the list of meritorious playwrights. The Song of a Goat by Jip Clark, shaped as a Greek drama, is certainly a noteworthy one. Swenka raised a crucial issue when he asked if ritual could be called drama. He could retain the African worldview, handle Oruba rituals, and still shape them in a dramatic mode with the movement and momentum of a drama. It is true that Swenka wrote primarily for the Nigerian audience, and the Oruba god Ogun is a recurring figure in the works of Swenka. But with his political commitment and his intellectual objectivity, Swenka could transcend the barriers of the local, and he sternly rejected any form of extremism. He believed that it is logical to support freedom of worship, but he condemned religion that practiced apocalyptic violence. It is perhaps true that the non-academic readers in India know basically and are familiar basically with Achibi and Swenka. And their works are more well known to them than the other African writers. But we must understand the reason why they are so acceptable in India. And at the same time, it is necessary for us to create a greater readiness to understand African literature in the Indian context. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for this illuminating lecture. Thank you, sir. May I now request Dr. Devashish Gupta, the
Thank you,
chairperson of
Professor
this session.
Shingupta, for this very comprehensive overview. Yes, please. I would like to thank Professor Shingupta for such a comprehensive overview of African literature, looking as he has done from an Indian perspective. I believe it's also time for us to start on the session for paper presentations. Would Professor Shubhapada Shankar initiate this session for paper presentations, please?
The first technical session for this international
Hello.
webinar will have.
I can't hear you, yes. Would you please initiate this session for paper presentation? Should we call, please?
Yes, the technical session should start, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you, thank you. I'm going to start the technical session, and since we are running short of time, I would request Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi he is lecturer of Translation Studies, Department of Foreign Languages and Literary Studies, Faculty of Arts, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. I would request Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi to present his paper. He is talking on translating cultural items, the case of proverbs in Achibe's Things Fall Apart. Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi, please. Professor Origi, can you hear me? Professor Origi, can you hear me, please? Something wrong with the link. Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi, can you hear me, please? I would request you to present your paper if you can hear me. There must be something wrong with the connection.
Chairperson, sir, can you please announce the name? Yeah, Samuel Awa Samuel is here on the screen. Yeah.
Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, he's online.
Yes, but I can't hear him. Am I audible, sir? Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi, am I audible, sir? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, sir? So should we, there must be something wrong with the connection. Should we move on to the next speaker then?
No, it's okay.
We can come back to you, Professor Origi.
Yeah, unmute
okay.
unmute.
Is there?
Professor Awa, please
You're asking me, sir? Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi, please unmute your audio and please, I can't hear you.
Awa Samuel,
I can't hear you, sir.
Please unmute your mic.
Professor Awa Samuel Origi, I can't hear you, sir. Can you please unmute your mic?
Yes, sir. দারুণ হয়েছে স্যার। হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার, খুব ভালো, দারুণ হয়েছে, খুব ভালো হয়েছে স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
Professor Awa Samuel Onimechi Origi, can you please unmute your mic, sir? I can't hear you.
Hi. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Please present your paper. Yes,
can you hear me now?
I can. Yes, I can. You are absolutely audible, sir.
Okay.
We can hear you. Please present your paper, translating cultural items.
Sorry?
Yes, sir, please.
Can I go ahead now?
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Can I go ahead with my presentation?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry?
Yes, sir, please continue. We can hear you. Yes, sir, you're audible.
Can I start now?
Continue. Please do start.
Okay, I am going ahead. Good day, everybody, and my name is Awa Samuel. I am calling from, I am presenting from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. And the title of my presentation is Translating cultural items, the case of Proverbs in
We have lost your connection, sir. We have lost your connection, sir. Something wrong with the net, is it? We can't hear you anymore, sir. Professor Awa Samuel, we have lost your connection. We can't hear you, sir. Professor Awa Samuel, we can't hear you, sir. Professor Awa Samuel, we can't hear you, sir. We have lost your connection. Hello, Professor Awa Samuel, can you hear me? Can you hear me, sir? Professor Awa Samuel, can you hear me, sir? I believe coordinator, sir, we should we come to Professor Awa Samuel later?
Yeah, we can invite our next speaker.
So in that case,
Yeah, if he comes again, Professor Awa.
in that case,
yes.
we will ask him to present later.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
So I'm going to invite the next speaker, Professor Bikiran Dhar. I'm inviting Professor Bikiran Dhar to present his paper. Bikiran Dhar is a sacked professor of the Department of English, Rishi Chandra College, Naihati, and Bikiran would be presenting would be talking on exploring Richter's wave through the lens of Sadir Pahar. Bikiran, please continue.
Sir, am I audible? Hello,
Yes,
sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please continue.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Bikiran Dhar from the Department of English in RBC College, Naihati. Now, before I start my presentation, I would like to thank our Honorable Principal and the Department of English of RBC College for providing us this wonderful platform. Now, I have a PowerPoint presentation and I would like to ask our chairperson, sir, please inform if you can see the presentation.
Not as yet. Please start.
Yes, sir, I am doing that. Wait a bit. Sir, is it visible now?
Yes, we can see you. It is visible. We can see you.
Sir, is the PowerPoint presentation visible?
Initially it was. You said Bikiran Dhar is presenting. That part was clear, but otherwise I can't see anything more.
Sir, while I will be delivering the presentation, I cannot see